When you are playing football every Saturday and the cameraman is taking photos of you, especially a wet look here, and you see, there's a phrase we use in football, you can see the full-backs going up the sides. And for me, the full-backs were coming inside as well, invertedly. Honestly, every Saturday I used to dread the photographs.
My understanding and my own experience is that transparency brings people through the door anyway. It's just a fact, you know. They actually really admire that, and that's actually what makes them think, actually, I want to go see this person, because he's the one who said to me, I'm not a good candidate for a transplant yet.
One of my best friends had a hair transplant. It was so successful, and it was so revolutionary in how he not only looked to everyone else, but how he perceived himself and had the energy that he then brought to the table. It was like two different blokes. It was literally like somebody had wound the clock back.
When I joined Manual, one of the things that we were focused on is not reducing the quality, the standard of the surgery. But that has to be maintained. Right? We want to provide the best standards we can at an affordable price point, but we can't match the prices of Turkey and the lower end clinics. If we cut corners, and that's something that I wasn't willing to do.
Hello and welcome back to The Men's Manual, a podcast designed to shine a light on some of the more unspoken areas of men's health and open up the conversation around these topics to find out a little bit more about the science behind them and why they can be so taboo. I'm your host, Shaun Stafford. I'm a Manual ambassador, and I love hosting this show and meeting all the interesting guests we have on who share their own stories and discuss these very personal and often complicated topics. In this episode, we are going to be exploring the subject of, are health quick fixes ever safe? And it's a topic that's been everywhere, particularly on social media recently, with many people opting to go abroad for cosmetic procedures. Sometimes they go 100% to plan and are fairly painless and straightforward. However, I think we've all seen the horror stories that many people share that certainly grab the headlines and get a lot of column inches of coverage in the press. Now, you all know by now that I love a stat, so I'm just going to dip into some research and statistics on the topic of today's podcast. Between 2019 and 2022, about 471,000 aesthetic or cosmetic surgeries were performed in Turkey, the highest recorded number to date. Meanwhile, according to the British Association for Aesthetic Plastic Surgeons, there's been a 94% increase in UK tourists who have corrective surgeries or dentistry in the past 3 years, and procedures carried out in Turkey account for more than 3/4 of those in the last 6 months alone. So now on to our guests for today. And joining me here to talk about quick medical fixes in more detail is Zander Murray, Scotland's first openly gay professional footballer who has his own story to share with surgery abroad and will help us discuss the idea of image, self-image, and how deeply it affects us. Zander, welcome to the Men's Manual.
Thank you very much, Shaun. Absolute pleasure.
And before we dive into our main subject, thanks for being here. What made you want to be on our podcast today?
Well, firstly, for one that's been to Turkey, and I wouldn't say it's a horror story, but there's certainly some takeaways that I'd like to, speak about and make sure that's open in the public, because it's a very, very important topic. Because like you said, that stat is staggering, so many people are going over to Turkey. So yeah, it's a very, very important story I've got, and some tangible takeaways to be extra mindful when you're thinking about going over to Turkey for your hair transplant.
It was also one of those ones where reading out the stats and reading out the numbers, it's one of those things where I've been through Stansted Airport and Heathrow Airport when a flight in from Istanbul has landed, and everybody's got almost like the special hats on, and you can see everybody, over the past couple of years. It's mind-blowing, the percentage. Like, a couple of years ago, it would have been, a couple of rows. Then it may have been 10 rows. Now it's half the plane. And it's genuinely staggering. And, those numbers that we talked about just quickly there, mind-blowing. 350,000 Brits a year.
Wow.
That's crazy.
When you said that, I can remember in the plane, like probably back then it was 2020. So I would say about a quarter of the plane was full of men with hair transplants, and we're just giving each other a little, all right, little nod.
You're right, mate.
with the branded, hair, all the different brands in Turkey. Takes me back.
And one of the things we love to do here on the Men's Manual is have an expert in the house to build on the personal experiences of our guest and to lean into some of the science behind the subject. And today, very special guest, we have Dr. Raja, a manual transplant surgeon and expert who will be able to explain cosmetic procedures in more detail and what to consider before going under the knife. Dr. Raja, thank you for being here. Give us a little bit of background about how you became to be a surgeon in hair transplants at Manual and why hair transplants in particular are such an area of focus for you.
Firstly, it's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me. So yeah, and you can call me Raj. In terms of hair transplants, this is something that I've been doing for about 6 years now, full time. Prior to that, I was an NHS doctor, and I was working in orthopedic surgery, training to be an orthopedic surgeon. And it was a very difficult time for the NHS, and I think it's got progressively worse since then. And at the time, I'd taken some time out to look at other options, and actually sort of fell into hair transplant because I was looking at alternative things like Botox and filler. And I ended up coming across a clinic that did robotic hair transplant surgery, which was quite interesting.
Did you say robotic hair transplant surgery?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So at the time, there was, I think they're still around, but actually I don't know many people who use them now. It was called an RTAS robot, is an American device, which is almost like a quarter of the size of this room. Really interesting thing. At the time I trained on that. That was my first ever hair transplant, was a robotic procedure.
Wow.
But it fell out of favor over the years for various reasons. And I think, it kind of filtered out who was good at doing the procedure by hand and, who was reliant on the robot.
So Zander, without letting the cat out of the bag, I'm guessing that you've had, just by you being on the pod today and also having an amazing head of hair, I'm guessing you've had a transplant. What led you to kind of make that decision and take that leap to go for a hair transplant?
I think when you are playing football every Saturday and the cameraman is taking photos of you, especially a wet look hair, and you see there's a phrase we use in football, you can see the fullbacks going up the sides. And for me, the fullbacks were coming inside as well, invertedly. So it just wasn't a good look, Shaun, I'll be honest. Like, I used to, honestly, every Saturday I used to dread the photographs. And of course the boys in the dressing room would have a bit of banter and stuff like that. And hair was everything to me. I love styling in it. I loved having like a long hair to slick it back. And at that point it was 2020, so we're deep in lockdown. When you played professional football, you have we got an exemption letter that we could, legally go and do our work under COVID restrictions. And there was I wouldn't say a loophole, but we were allowed to go on holiday, but as long as it was deemed as business. So obviously done a bit of research, and hair transplants are cheap anyway in Turkey, but it was extra cheap because it was lockdown and the flights were really cheap. So I thought, let's go over. Probably I should have done my due diligence a wee bit more, I'll be honest, in terms of the organisation. I just knew a couple of footballers were getting it done from this specific surgeon. And that's one sort of red flag was on their website. I'm not going to name who it was, but when I actually met the doctor in Turkey, it didn't look like the woman that was on their website.
Got it.
But I just thought, do you know what? I'll go with it.
I'm here now, in for a penny, in for a pound.
And listen, nice clinic and stuff, but you are seen as a conveyor belt. You can just see it's like just a stream of people. And I probably, in hindsight, little things I'm thinking about, they didn't tell me, this Dr. Raj, they inject sort of adrenaline into you to raise your head, to raise the sort of levels. And, I had a heart operation when I was 16. I didn't get a heads up about that. And that, seeing we've all got the heart monitors and you can see your heart rate going up and up and up when they inject the adrenaline. That was quite nerve-wracking. And I'll never forget the first hair that they took out the back. I got is it FUE, when you take individual strands? Yeah. So I remember when they took the first strand out of me, and the boy slapped me in the head. He went, "Lucky boy, you're a lucky boy." He's like, "Yes, we're going to have a good transplant." I don't know how but he said he could tell from the donor, like the first hair, that you're going to have a good. That's okay, that's great. But yeah, unfortunately, listen, I'm lucky. A lot of people have horror stories with hair transplants, but yeah, two things that have maybe stayed with me long term is that my heads went fully numb. and I don't know if you obviously looked at that later on, Dr. Raj, when they inject you, obviously the site to numb the area, some of my head's still quite numb, which actually has helped for football. Like I can hit the ball and I don't really feel it, especially in a cold Scottish winter day. But yes, some of my sort of nerves in my head, especially at the front, are completely numb. And obviously now, thank you for the compliment saying I've got a full head of hair. But yeah, similarly, it's 4 years now, and I've maybe not took the treatments that I maybe should have. Obviously worried about the football, but now I've had a few consultations with a few hair transplants specialists, and they tell me you've actually got a lot of scarring in your head. They've not. It may look like you've done a good job in a lot of hair, but they've left a lot of mess, like deep down. So my advice is to anyone, make sure you do your due diligence. I'm not dissing all the Turkish hair transplant specialists. I'm sure some of them are really, really great, but I probably went for the cheaper option. In hindsight, I probably would have waited a bit and done a bit more research, because it's a proper sales environment, even pre-transplant. The way they're trying to like get the deal done, they're really, really targeting you and going for you. Constant phone calls, and then once you get it done, it's quite actually challenging to get a hold of them.
So, from the really micro interaction I've had with Dr. Raja so far, he seems like if I had a conversation with Dr. Raja and I was considering a hair transplant, I would get all the information that would make me feel secure and confident in the procedure I was about to have. Did you get that sort of pre-game consultation sort of from the surgery abroad?
No. And probably I was pressured probably because of playing the football and banter, and it was kind of a trend as it is now, all the footballers going. Yeah, I probably should have. Obviously, I've engaged with men, like you're engaged with yourself, and you've just got so much knowledge in this area, and what's right for you, not just trying to get you to go over to Turkey and just get your hair transplant, one and done, then away you go. You know what I mean? You actually gave me long-term soluble advice on, no, this is what you actually should do. Don't you? Yeah, maybe get a hair transplant in the future, but maybe consider X, Y, and Z, which does not happen in Turkey. There's that fast, quick approach. So in hindsight, I would urge anyone, make sure you do your due diligence and speak to a few people. Don't just do what I did and speak to the first one. I'm like, okay, done, good deal. Yeah, because it's your hair, it's your health, and it's an operation. I did not know I'm going to be injected with, the step by step, but shave your head off, and then you're getting your head injected with adrenaline to raise the head, so it's easier to take the hairs out. I didn't get the heads up before that, and that panicked me. So if anyone's got a heart condition or worried about their heart health, like, be extra mindful. That's what happens. Frightful life, so I did. Yeah, especially if you slap in the head as well. No, I could feel it.
So Dr. Raj, looking back at your career, even if we just take the last 6 years, for example, you say that, the science and the procedure has evolved and developed quite a lot. It's gone from primarily being robotic to now very much individual and by hand. What sort of other trends have there been in that time when it comes to hair transplants?
Yeah, I think interestingly, the robot at the time was a bit of a, I don't want to say the word gimmick, but it was one of those things that periodically pops up in the cosmetic surgery industry, like the new craze at the time, right? But it was done by hand without any tools that are motorized, and then the robotic procedures and the motorized procedures came in. And at the time when I started doing procedures by hand, it would perhaps have been conventional to use a 0.95 or a 1 millimeter punch, which, to explain it in easy terms, it's a device that we use to extract the follicles. And that what that translates into is larger scars. Then the procedures we're routinely doing now would be a 0.8 millimeter punch to start off with.
Right.
So you can see that just in that space of maybe 5-6 years, we've had a reduction in punch size of about 20%.
Wow.
Which means that we get better scar visibility and healing, and actually we're able to take larger graft volumes. So the procedure's morphed from being almost like a touch-up to a transformation procedure.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting.
Well, that's super interesting. I'm guessing that the way that you would operate and potentially the advice you would be giving to people. So say that somebody walked into your surgery in your clinic and they were considering a hair transplant. What would the process look like for them?
So we actually have quite an extensive patient pathway in place at the moment. So it starts off by just, the initial inquiry, when patients will send in a photograph, and, we have a team of patient coordinators who are trained and actually have been dealing with hair transplant patients for several years. So they have a very good idea of who's suitable and who's not going to be suitable for a transplant. And depending on whether they're actually suitable for a procedure, we will adjust accordingly. Like if they're suitable, bring them in for a consultation. If they're not suitable, we would explain that it's unlikely that we're going to be able to do anything surgically for you. However, if you still want to come in for advice, etc., I'm still happy. I'm always happy to see them and discuss it with them. And then, taking it from that point on, once we've done the consultation, prior to that, they have a medical history questionnaire. So, if there's any red flags that would come up, like you were mentioning about underlying conditions, or if you've had any surgery in the past. I mean, recently had a patient who's a perfectly good candidate, but he had a heart condition that was underlying. So if we hadn't done that check, we wouldn't know about it.
Yeah.
These sort of safeguards are, to some degree, imported from what we've been trained, how we've been trained in the NHS, because we have to have these procedures in place.
Sounds like quite a good thing to have in place as well.
Yeah,
It doesn't sound like a bad thing. A little bit of safeguarding.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, the only issue with that is because it's in the private sector, it's not very well regulated. In that, Turkish clinics have their own issues, but then we've got a lot of clinics in the UK that are not following a set protocol, and that creates its own problems.
You said that some people may not be eligible for hair transplants. What sort of conditions do you have to be able to meet the criteria to be eligible for such a procedure?
If we're looking at general health, we want to make sure somebody's generally fit and well, because the procedure is done under local anesthetic over a long time period, as you know. So, you're in surgery for 5, 6, 7 hours, could be a bit longer. So if somebody's got underlying heart condition, for example, we'd be concerned about them developing any potential cardiac complications. We're not in an acute setting where we can handle that in a way that you would be able to if you were in a hospital. So, we have to have these things in mind before we do the procedure. But, generally fit and well people, as long as, we do treat people with underlying conditions. Like somebody's got diabetes, I'm happy to treat them as long as their diabetes is well controlled, right? So we get them to send out their recent blood tests, make sure everything's in line before we go ahead and do it. But they have to be vetted carefully. And we largely, I follow the protocol for what the NHS would define as safe surgery protocols. For example, diabetic patients, they have to be below a certain threshold in terms of their diabetic control, etc.
So I'm so fascinated. Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
You were saying about the regulated then, so it's privately regulated. Is it regulated here? Because you're obviously going with your NHS protocols from your background, which is amazing. But is that actually regulated here in the UK?
So there's, our regulatory body from a clinical point of view is a CQC, or the Care Quality Commission. And they don't just regulate independent clinics. It's almost like nursing homes, social care, all of that stuff, which means that they've got a huge amount of workload on their plate to deal with already. That said, they're not just looking at hair transplants, they're also looking at sort of aesthetic clinics, minor surgery clinics. So there's no set guidance or protocol for what a hair transplant clinic should be doing. There's societies like the British Association of Hair Restoration Surgeons, of which I'm a member as well. And as a body of surgeons, we try and create protocols and ratify that between us to say, well, this is how things should be done. But nobody's sort of obliged to stick to that protocol. That's more of a discretionary thing.
Okay.
So it's sort of each to your own in the industry, which is, it's a problem, and it's something that we're working on all the time. But when we're talking about bad results from hair transplant, the bulk of the ones I've seen have been from local clinics that are cheap rather than Turkish ones. The Turkish ones are generally, it's the same things again and again. Local ones tend to be really bad practices,
Well,
yeah.
And so say somebody comes into your office and they hadn't looked at anything prior to having surgery.
Yeah.
Is this something that you would look to explore with them?
You mean in terms of other treatment options?
Yeah.
Right. So, I'm a big believer in non-surgical treatment alongside a transplant. And we talked about this when we did our a consultation a while ago about the long-term prevention strategy.
Yep.
Because it's all well and good having a surgery done, but this is a progressive condition that's going to get worse with time. And that means that we need to slow down the ongoing loss, treat the underlying problem before we can cure it or treat it with a transplant, right? And you'd be surprised how many cases I've seen where that's just not even been discussed in the first place.
Obviously, I spoke to other consultants. You're the only one that actually had that in place, that sort of holistic approach, rather than just trying to get you in to get the transplant and then discussing other options, which I think was fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, my understanding and my own experience is that transparency brings people through the door anyway, right? So I've never been in a position where, we're sort of rushing to get people in. And I think patients really admire that, that fact that you can actually just speak to them like they're coming in for like a private healthcare consultation, NHS consultation, and it's just the facts, They actually really admire that. And that's actually what makes them think, actually, I want to go see this person because he's the one who said to me, I'm not a good candidate for a transplant yet. Maybe in a year's time, when I've tried the medication, I might see an improvement, right?
Yep. But it's a duty of care thing, isn't it? Right? You're a doctor. There's the autocratic oath. You have a duty of care to the people that walk into your office, and I think
Hippocrates.
Exactly. That it's one of those ones where if you're coming across like a car salesman, chances are that might scare a lot of people off. So it's really, really interesting that you have that conversation, and effectively it might be shortchanging yourself of business in the short term, but it's for the well-being and the longer term benefit of that patient. So obviously being in the locker room and the banter that flies around, especially with professional sportsmen, can be quite brutal.
Yes.
And a lot of it is appearance based, right?
Absolutely.
Going through a process of losing your hair or having a receding hairline puts a big target on your back, right? How did you handle the banter in the locker room, and how did it kind of make you feel?
When you've been in it for so long, you are just accustomed to it, and I wouldn't say you're immune, but you're just used to how these men just communicate. Do you know what I mean? So you do become embroiled in it, and you give as good as I get. Do you know what I mean? But it can directly impact your mental health. We need to be open and honest. Like a lot of these men that are maybe doing a lot of the slaggings in the dressing room, they're probably the ones that are dealing with the most. Dealing with a lot of issues, and I was dealing with a big thing as well, like been struggling with my own sexuality, so it probably hampered me more. Whereas if it happened now, would I got a transplant? Would I maybe just shaved it off? I maybe might have, I don't know. But because I was dealing with something else, it did massive impact in it. And that relates to anyone, do you know what I mean? Someone could be slagging you about your hair, but if you're going through a tough time with something else, like that could just be the extra wee thing that edges you over. So as much as, I welcome banter, from Glasgow, that's what we're known for, especially in the football dressing rooms there, they're really cutthroat, but just be extra mindful, because you could be directly impacting someone, and then they go like me and go for the quick fix and go with Turkey. And and luckily, I'm lucky. I know there's, like you said, many horror stories, Dr. Raj, and a lot of people spend fortunes and they don't get any reward. There's no actual hair that grows. I was lucky, I had an absolute cracker. I would no doubt be completely bald right now if it wasn't for that transplant. But there is some long-term things, unfortunately, that I'll need to deal with, having this numb head, do you know what I mean? But thankfully I'm retired from football now, so I don't need head of the ball anymore, so that's one bonus.
So obviously being a professional footballer, the highlight of your week would be Saturday afternoon, right? But you've also said that post-game, when the photos of the game came out, or when the video came out, it used to fill you with a little bit of dread because you would really notice that your hair was thinning. Mm-hmm. Obviously that has a real impact on you and your self-image, and with everything that you've been going through, how did that all boil into one, and how did that make you feel, and what drove you to kind of take the steps that you've taken?
I've retired now, so I can say I was. That's so strange. I'm used to saying that I am, or I was. Well, so I was. I would say I was a leader in dressing room, Shaun. I was, aggressive. I'm a winner and ultra. I would say ultra, but I'm masculine, and I'm an absolute at training. I'm all out. I'm proper, and I wouldn't say I was a lad, but unfortunately, when you sort of fit that stereotype, you just fall into that, because I'm like, okay, this is everyone like me is acting like this, i.e. being a lad and taking the mickey at people, blah blah. So I just fell into that. I would say I would say it's a trap, because obviously I was hiding something and keeping it in a box, and as I was getting older and older and older, the box was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. What's in the box was getting bigger and bigger and bigger, you know? So
why did you feel like you needed to hide it?
Because it's weird, but maybe brainwashed myself when I was younger. Like I just couldn't, for years and years and years, 13 to 29, I couldn't understand how can I be masculine, more fit, or more faster, more stronger, or more of a leader in this dressing room that everyone looks up to me, especially younger ones. How can I be that man and also, you know, be gay? I just could not put the two and two together. And unfortunately, with that fight and trying to live up to that laddish stereotype, that did affect my decisions, i.e. going to Turkey and getting that, because I still wanted to be seen as that lad, you know, with the hair and I used to go to sunbeds. Don't go to sunbeds, sorry. But, you know, I just wanted to live up to that. Because I was a leader in the dressing room, I thought that's what I should have done. That's what it should have been. And I'm glad that near the end of my career, I finally just thought, you know what? Just go for it. Just accept who you are. It's what will be, will be. And what a beautiful journey. It's been amazing. And obviously, I'm glad I took the leap and played pro at 31. But it's just crazy when you are hiding something like that, like how many poor decisions you make, like in your career or even in your life. Like, I could have played higher so many times when I was younger, and the only reason I couldn't was because I was gay. But then similarly, the amount of stupid decisions you make just because you're hiding something and you're struggling with something, so you're just not thinking with a clear headspace, which obviously led me to go to Turkey. And that could have went, for how cheap, you know, that could have went really bad. So I am lucky, and I've heard absolute horror stories going to Turkey, and similar, like you said, local ones here. So I am very lucky and blessed that it's all turned out. I'm going to be sitting here. It's amazing.
Do you wish that you'd come out earlier and had the courage to come out earlier? And do you think that would have maybe changed some of the decisions you've made around your self-image? And
100%, I would not. That's why I'm doing so much work in terms of being an ambassador. I want no one to struggle like I did. Absolutely would have been so much easier, but it's just that masculinity, that culture, when you're in a you know yourself, you're in that hyper masculine environment. Do you know what I mean? It's very challenging when you know you're like them a lot, but there's this one big thing that you're hearing a lot with the murmurs in the dressing room and stuff, that it seems a very inferior thing to be gay. So I just hid that, and from, you know, coming out, I didn't. That's why I'm being an ambassador. Shaun, I had no idea the amount of people, out of 133,000 footballers in worldwide playing in the men's game, there's 5 who's only openly out about their sexuality, which is fascinating. If you look at the figures, it should be roughly about around 9,000. So I had no idea that impact. You know, young kids messaging me, young kids sending me letters, people from all ages. So that's why I was like, wow, God, like I wish I'd done that when I was younger. And in the football world now, it'd probably be the same in rugby when, you know, we had Gareth Thomas. No one cares. No one gives a monkeys. They're like, they still have banter, you know, they still take the mickey, but they're like, bro, we still love you. Like, it's not a big deal. So I did. In hindsight, I'm like, wish I'd done it.
That was going to be my next question was, what were the boys in the dressing room like when you owned it?
Like you said, I was a leader in the I am a leader in the dressing room. When you're obsessed about something, you know, I just get all in. Boys used to call me like a teacher's pet with the manager, just because he said, you know, I'd run through brick walls for good managers. Same with my boys and teammates, you know what I mean? I was always captains or vice captains of my teams, and I was so worried that if I came out, like, are they going to think of me differently? Are they going to be walking around eggshells? Like, God, when we go for showers and stuff, are they going to be feeling dead awkward? Or no, am I going to feel awkward so it'll make them feel awkward? What about the physio when I'm getting a rub? All this stuff, you think of it, honestly, it's wild. And then I walked in, just fresh off the Lorraine Kelly interview, and they'll just bust out laughing. They're like, oh my God. They'll just take the mickey at me, like how nervous I was, like on Lorraine Kelly and stuff. And they're like, we don't care, mate. Just be yourself. We don't get monkeys. And probably put their arm around me, and I can't. That just meant the world, eh? It really, really did. And now I'm obviously in a better headspace. So if I do get a second hair transplant, I will do my due diligence and make sure it's right. Do you know what I mean? And get research from the experts like Dr. Raj.
Did the banter in the locker room change?
Aye,
a little bit. Yeah.
like maybe one of them would slip up sometimes and they'd be like, Zander, so sorry, I'm so sorry. And I'm like, it's fine. There don't feel the need to like be like, how dare you say that? Do you know what I mean? I think naturally, like I've been open about my story and stuff in my documentary, like they've kind of realised, oh my God, he was struggling, you know? They were like, I just thought you were just an angry wee guy. And I was like, no, that's what I was sort of hiding, trying to pretend about. It's how this is my life now is incredible, Shaun. It's been a full 360. But you've also been an absolute champion in sports. Have you ever felt that you need to live up to these sort of expectations or norms within masculinity?
Yeah, no, I think anybody that has their identity attached to something, whether it's a certain way you look or a certain way you appear in a dressing room or on social media or that sort of stuff, I think there comes with that some inherent pressure to be a certain way.
Yep.
Even when it comes down and boiling down to being a man and what we all perceive, as this is the archetypal version of a man in my eyes, trying to live up to that all the time can be really, really challenging. So yeah, what am I known for and what's my identity for the last 10 years been? It's been being in shape and being a physique athlete and being a world champion, and people kind of expect you to be in shape all the time. So it's one of those ones where they see the photos from the shows and you're 0% body fat, you're perfectly, proportioned and, conditioned, and you walk on stage and your tan is flawless and you wear makeup and your makeup is great and you glide on stage, and that is the idea of you at your best. And that's kind of what people assume you will be 365 days a year, when the reality is, and we all know this, that, there are times on your journey when you peak and there are times when you trough. And it's about trying to negotiate with yourself that when you're in those troughs and when living life normally and you're not at those peaks and you're not operating at those peaks, that it's absolutely okay. I'll be honest with you, there's been times when I've been playing in the garden with my kids, sun's out, kicking a football around, jumping around in the paddling pool. And my missus has taken a video and added it to her story. And I haven't been in what I would say peak physical condition, or I wasn't aware she was taking the video, and, my stomach's a bit loose and I'm not tensing my abs. And, and I'd be like, you can't post that because that isn't what people think I look like.
Yeah.
And she's like, yeah, but it is what you look like. And it's that, and you said it, it's about having that appreciation and realization that it's okay to be exactly as you are all the time. And yeah, we can strive to be a certain way, and we can, have goals and aspirations of how we want to be, whether it's as a man, as an athlete, as a leader. But I think being human and humanizing the ups and downs of that journey is probably the most important thing. And it makes you very, very settled in yourself, and that level of calm is what makes you a much more chilled person.
Was that a transition for you, like being, champion and stuff, and then now sort of changing and evolving? Did that take a while to be like, do you know what? Yeah, you can post that photo up.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those ones where I think it's when you learn to adjust your version of what your identity is, and when that version of your identity softens and becomes more aligned with what you're actually like in real life, right? I'm not a world champion bodybuilder all the time. I'm a dad, I'm a business owner, I like hosting podcasts, I like having a chat, I like being real. And I think as soon as I start to identify more with that, rather than this snapshot of what I can be at a very short period of time if everything goes right, then it's a much more realistic sort of representation of who I actually am. And I think with men, and especially when it comes to hair and hair loss, there is some level of stigma and association with being bald or having a receding hairline and what that can mean. Dr. Raj, you must have had so many people come into your surgeries and, have a terrible self-image about themselves because of their hair. What would you be saying to those guys?
Well, I mean, it's interesting we're discussing this. I recently had somebody who, even I was surprised to learn that somebody had said or made a remark, like a locker room comment, right? When this fellow was maybe 20 years old. He's now perhaps 30, 31, and he's now looking at having a hair transplant. But what he said to me struck me, because what he said is, from that time until now, it's been in the back of his mind that, he needs to get a hair transplant, but he's just not, got around to doing it, might have other commitments, etc. But what I found interesting was that one comment said by that person, probably in a completely dismissive way, thinking it's harmless, stuck with this guy for 10 years, right? And that's the impact it can have. And you'd be surprised how many people have come in with that same story. Somebody at work, while they were walking past, they made a remark about my ball patch, and now I'm here to get a hair transplant, right? It's all too common. And certainly, your story resonates with hundreds of stories that I've heard that are in that same environment. People underestimate the effect it can have on your mental health, the pressures. And, coming back to what you said about low self-esteem, I think the vast majority of the patients I see to some degree will have some element of that. It's rare to get people who are extremely confident about their looks having a hair transplant. You do get this. It's a different type of patient, right? And they're usually ones who are sort of really into fine tweaking. And then the vast majority of the ones I see will be those who are self-conscious. And that's usually, there's a trigger behind that. But for me, as I said, I kind of sort of fell into it. And then I realized how important hair can be to people. I mean, it largely, people don't think it's such an important thing, but actually when you delve into patient experience and what people are going through, the ones who are experiencing hair loss, it can be crippling. I've seen people, extreme transformation, somebody who's, let's say, 18 or 19 years old and has got early onset male pattern loss, almost completely gone on top. So, you'd see them and you think they're like maybe in their 40s, right? That guy is going to struggle, to be in relationships. He's going to struggle to find a job, right? And it's like the world around him is crumbling because of this one issue. And I've seen the same person come back a year later down the line, completely different guy.
That must be such a rewarding part of your job.
Oh, massively, yeah. And that's why I stuck in it, to be honest, because I think previously when I was doing trauma and orthopedic surgery, I'd see patients for a very brief period. We'd do the surgeries, we'd treat them, and they're gone, and you never see them again, right? The most rewarding thing about this role is actually I get to speak to people throughout the whole day. So I get to learn a lot about that person. And then I see the person come back in a year's time, right? 6 months to a year. And I can always, I'm always looking for the change in energy. And that's very apparent, right? So from a negative energy to a positive energy, and it's extremely rewarding.
I can resonate with kind of both what you were saying in terms of, I'm just thinking about my story as you're both talking, like the trigger was 100% when the boys in that dressing room not accepting my own self for me to go and get that hair transplant. And I did feel relatively better, but it was a quick fix. Whereas now when I'm maybe considering another second transplant, it's so different, like you were alluding to with your family, like when your wife said, "This is you." I'm now at the point I'm like, yeah, it'd be great if I could get another hair transplant. But see if I don't, and my hair does fall out, I'm like, so what? I'm happy now.
Yeah.
But it'd be good, it'd make me feel better and have a nice head of hair again and swish it back like your man's here. That'd be lovely. And that's so fascinating when you're telling us about that, like how many men are coming in and it's that trigger that they're wanting that change. Yeah.
Oh, very common. It's very common, more common than you think.
I my personal experience with, and you mentioned it about that energy change, is one of my best friends had a hair transplant, and he had a terrible bald patch at the back, and we used to work together, and he used to, when he was watching CCTV footage back, obviously because the cameras are up high, he would be like, and it would really pain him, like when he would see the footage and he'd just see this sort of like big bald patch in the back, and he was like, "I'm going to get it fixed. Like everyone's getting it fixed now, and therefore it's okay for me to get fixed." I was like, "Hey, it's okay if it makes you genuinely uncomfortable and you don't like it, and there is a quick fix, like, and you want to go and do it, go and do it." And so he went to go and get the back sorted, and they were like, "No, you need the whole lot." So they did the back, they did the front, they did the whole shebang. And this was probably about a year before his wedding, and he did it in kind of preparation for his wedding. And this isn't a horror story, so I see your face.
I know, I was waiting.
But it was so successful.
Well,
And it was so revolutionary in how he not only looked to everyone else, but how he perceived himself and had the energy that he then brought to the table. It was like two different blokes. It was literally like somebody had wound the clock back, not only physiologically 10 years, 15 years, but mentally for him. He was a different guy. He had a spring in his step. You must see that all the time with patients that come back to see you.
Absolutely. It's something, for me, that's the most rewarding thing for doing the transplant. And, there's a flip side to this as well. Like, things can go the other way if it's not done properly. Like, I guess you can, to some degree, like looking back on your experience in Turkey, you can say that it's a bit of a mixed bag, but there's some people who have a really bad experience. And if they're already in that vulnerable situation, they end up worse off, then it's very difficult, to get them out of that. And that can lead on to things like depression, alcohol, drug addiction, and so on. It's a serious thing. And I think it's really important to a lot of men, and it shouldn't be taken lightly.
What do you think the answer is? So obviously, probably one of the major driving factors for people to look to go abroad for surgeries, whether it's hair transplant, whether it's dentistry, whether it's other procedures, is a cost.
Yes.
What should we be doing here in the UK to kind of make those sort of options more accessible to men, and also just to educate them a bit better about what options are available to them?
That's a very good question. And, my experience, having done procedures, which, probably most people would say are quite expensive. When I joined Manual, one of the things that, we were focused on is not reducing the quality, the standard of the surgery. But, that has to be maintained, right? We want to provide the best standards we can at an affordable price point, but we can't match the prices of Turkey and the lower end clinics. If we cut corners, and that's something that I wasn't willing to do. No. And I will never be able or willing to do that. So, things like the doctor, doing the harvesting, the incisions, directly performing the procedure are quite important to me as a surgeon and to my patients, largely. But there's clinics where technicians will do the harvesting part of the procedure.
That's what happened to me. Consultant that met me, who was not the picture that I see on the website. She was there for the beginning, then she was away. So yeah, that's exactly what happened.
Exactly. And see, doctors are a limited resource. I mean, we're at the moment, looking at doctors to bring in as part of our project. So I know it's extremely difficult to find good doctors that are doing hair transplant in the UK. And, I would imagine Turkey to some degree is the same, but on a larger scale. Yeah. So if you're looking at economies of scale and volumes, there's no other way to get around it apart from training lay people a lot of the time.
Like legit at Turkish schools, I used to be a career coach when I was part-time football. Teachers may ask the kids, like, what do you want to be? I guarantee half the boys or the girls will be like, I want to be a hair transplant surgeon. It's massive, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like,
huge. Yeah. So, there are a lot of options, that are cheaper, but usually there's a reason. There's always a reason.
There's risks.
Yes, absolutely. Simple things like equipment, right? We invest in good quality equipment and making sure that our procedures are safe. You'd be surprised, I think, and shocked if you knew or if you've seen what I've seen in some clinics in the UK. All right, theatres not being cleaned well between patients, equipment being reused, that sort of thing. So it's just really bad practices. And it's dangerous as well, not just worrying, it's actually dangerous.
And in terms of, I know you said you didn't do much research prior to jumping on the plane, but when we're looking at the cost difference between going and seeing somebody here, maybe in the UK in London, or maybe up north in Leeds, versus going to Turkey, what sort of difference in price are we looking at?
I did a quick size up. I say quick, like I knew a boy that went to one like local in Glasgow. I was £1,200 all in.
Flights included.
Flights and everything, which is bloody. That's cheap. That's cheap. They said max grafts as well. Don't know how you feel about that. They said, yeah, whatever you want, we'll do. whatever.
Max, gone unpack for a layman.
So yeah,
What is max graft? So that means you can have as many follicles pulled
As
out
you
the
want.
back and stuck in the front as you
As
can.
you want, yeah.
Wow.
Which is, I mean, to anybody,
Red flag.
even, it's just a crazy thing, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I think most people know that there's a limit to what we can take.
Oh, no. Obviously, you educated me massively, and that can change as well because where do you think you're going bald, but it can also be pushed back and back and back as you're waiting to actually go on the hair transplant. There's so many things you need to think about, which I wasn't concerned. I'm like, right, if this can help me feel a wee bit better about myself, then I'll do it. Don't get me wrong, I was lucky. It was good, but you need to be so careful.
It was relatively good, as in it wasn't a horror story.
It wasn't a horror story, but I have had obviously some side effects. But yeah, at that time, transplants were maybe in Glasgow, I think they were like 4 or 5 grand, I think. And there was more duty of care, similar to yourself. There was more duty of care. They don't offer. I think they offer max. Quote me if I'm wrong. Is it 4,000? Is that max? No, that was Turkey. I'm sure 2,000 or something around. Or can you?
I mean, it varies, but I generally say about 2,000 to 2,500 grafts per session.
Yeah, okay.
Is about a safe amount as a maximum.
And a session lasts for
1 day.
Oh, so 6 to 8 hours in the chair.
Usually, 1 day.
Mine was. They said they put in 4,000, but I don't. Is that
I don't think I've ever yet met a patient who's told me the number that he's had in Turkey, and looking at the back of their head, it actually tallies up with what's actually been taken.
Yeah,
it's always like double. You know what they've said. Like what they've said is double what's actually there. You know,
and so obviously Zander's £1,200 well spent. And obviously there's inflation, and that was a good couple of years ago, and hair transplants are much more popular now, and the science has probably evolved. If we were coming to see a clinic or a surgeon in the UK right now, what would be the average price for a kind of entry-level hair transplant?
I mean, it varies massively. So it's on a huge spectrum. I mean, you can get into a hair transplant clinic for a free consultation. There's loads of them that are doing that. In fact, we have inquiries of people saying, do you do free consultations? And we don't, because, you're going to see a doctor in the consultation. Whereas a lot of these places, you're going to see a salesperson, right? So that's the first thing. And a free consultation really should be a red flag thing, right? If you're looking for a hair transplant. But the ones that offer free consults, usually, entry level, you're looking at sort of 2,000 to 3,000 for a maximum graft procedure, unlimited, whatever, right? And it's basically telling you whatever you want to hear to get you through the door. But then, you will have more decent clinics, which are probably like 4, 5, 6, 7 grand. And, I've done procedures that have been 14, 15, 16,000 in the past.
Wow. So something we love to do here on the Men's Manual is pick our guests' brains and lean into your experiences and your expertise.
Okay.
So that we can leave something tangible for the people that follow us. This is our legacy. This is the actual Men's Manual. And what I'm going to ask you to do is have a think about what you might want to write on your own page. And it can be something that we've talked about today. It can be something that we haven't talked about today. It can be a quote. It can be anything that resonates with you as a person. Okay? Something that you want to hang your hat on and leave for the person that's going to sit in that chair to follow you. And then hopefully we can turn this into a leather-bound book and actually make and print a real version of the Men's Manual. So Zander, I'm going to start with you.
Love that.
What do you think your entry into the Men's Manual might be?
Well, I speak as a right or
no, don't write. Just tell us, and then you can write later.
Okay. I think you've hit the nail on the head today. I think it's be super mindful of that trigger that is triggering you to get that fast, quick fix. When really you need to probably delve a bit deeper and think, why is this actually happening? Why am I getting a reaction to this? And why is it causing such an intense reaction? Once you sort of get to the answer to that, then you fully accept yourself for what you are and embrace yourself. And, once you're feeling good, if you feel right, go and get a hair transplant and go and fix it. But work on yourself first to make sure you're happy inside. Because for me, you always make better decisions, and the right decisions when you're in a good headspace. And that's a takeaway that I'm definitely, from listening to both of you today, feel very inspired, and that's one of the takeaways I'm going to put in this book.
Amazing.
Dr. Raj, passing it on to me now.
Yours has got to be great as well, because you've had more time to think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about what I should say, and a quote that always resonated with me is, the best or nothing, right? And it's like, I don't know if I'm stealing that from somewhere, but that's a way I would say that to patients as well, and I would say that to colleagues of mine as well, or anybody who I'm training up perhaps to be a hair transplant surgeon, that you should never compromise on principles, and quality is the most important thing. And I think, generally speaking, all my patients would expect that we do our best for them, and we're transparent. So transparency is key. We're dealing with people who are, on different journeys in life, and actually going through quite a difficult thing that they can't really speak to many people about, right? So, we're in a privileged position to be able to lend an ear, but actually be able to do something about it for them, which I think is an amazing thing. So I would say, give them the best you can, or nothing.
Amazing. So that concludes another amazing episode of the Men's Manual podcast. Zander, thank you so much for sharing your journey. I'm sure many of our listeners out there will really connect with your experiences and take a lot from everything that you've shared. So thank you for coming down and spending the time with us today.
Absolute pleasure.
And Dr. Raj, thank you so much for sharing your insights too, and for helping us understand more about the details of surgery and cosmetic procedures. You'll be sticking around on the sofa just a little bit longer to help me capture some extra content for our bonus XY episode to follow this main pod. And last, but certainly not least, a massive thank you to all of you listening. We couldn't do this podcast and have these amazing conversations without you guys on the other end. So thank you again from myself and the whole team here at the Men's Manual. If anything in this episode has resonated with you, please do share and engage with us. We love as much engagement and interaction with our content and community as possible, as it helps more people find us and get to see what we're up to on the podcast. Also, be sure to like, turn on notifications, and subscribe to the podcast, giving us a lovely review or rating. This really helps the success of the show and helps other people find us. I'm Shaun Stafford. This is the Men's Manual podcast, and we'll see you again next time.